Drones, complaints, harassment. The HOA declared war on day 3. I inherited a mega ranch in Colorado, but before I could even catch my breath, the HOA rolled up claiming they had authority over my land. That's when the ground shifted, because every step they took woke up the truth my father left behind. Stick with me. You're about to see how fast an HOA crumbles when the law and the land finally speak up. If you've ever stood your ground for what's yours, hit subscribe and ride with me. These HOA stories only get wilder from here. The gravel popped under my tires as I eased my truck up the final rise toward my father's gate. I hadn't been back to the Maddox Ranch in years, not since before Dad's health turned and the land started carrying more silence than cattle. All I wanted was to unlock the gate, walk the porch my father built with his own hands, and figure out what the rest of my life was supposed to look like. Grief makes ordinary tasks feel heavier, and today even turning a key felt like lifting stone. But before I reached the gate, 3 vehicles slid out from the tree line like they'd been waiting for me. A white Lexus in front, 2 black SUVs behind. They parked broadside across the entrance, blocking the way onto my own land. For a moment, I wondered if I'd made a wrong turn. Then the driver's door on the Lexus opened, and out stepped a woman in a tailored blazer and heels that didn't make sense on a dirt road. "Mr. Maddox?" she asked, though she wasn't really asking anything. Her tone was the kind people use when they've already decided who you are. "That's right," I said, stepping out of my truck. She approached with a clipboard hugged tight to her chest. "Linda Caraway, President of the Marshland Heights Homeowners Association." I blinked. Marshland Heights sat across the ridge on the other side of the lake. White-trimmed houses, manicured lawns, and paved sidewalks that never belonged to my family's world. "Ma'am, this ranch isn't part of your HOA." Her smile held no warmth. "While it's true your father's parcel isn't under our covenant, your land directly borders our community. That means your activities, maintenance decisions, and overall visual presence fall under our influence guidelines." "Influence guidelines," I repeated, not sure whether to laugh or check if someone was filming a prank. She continued, unbothered. "We've had several complaints from residents about the visible disrepair along your fence line, the unregulated access around the lake, and the presence of heavy equipment near the shoreline." "My father just passed," I said quietly. "I got here 10 minutes ago." Linda nodded as though my grief were merely an administrative inconvenience. "All the more reason for us to begin the compliance conversation early. Transitions like this can get messy." Behind her, the SUV doors cracked open, and 2 men stepped out, clipboard carriers, the same uniform smugness, each wearing the kind of HOA badge that looks official enough to fool people who don't know better. They surveyed the property like inspectors preparing to condemn it. A slow heat spread through my chest. "I'm not signing anything today," I said. "I need time to settle my father's affairs." She stepped closer. "Mr. Maddox, Marshland Heights depends on stable visual cohesion. Your ranch, and especially that lake, is a central part of our community experience. If its condition drops, so do property values. Surely you wouldn't want that on your conscience, especially while residents are already expressing concern." There it was, a threat dressed like community spirit. I met her eyes. "Again, my land isn't under your authority." Her smile thinned until it was barely a line. "It borders us," she repeated slowly, like she was instructing a stubborn child. "That means it affects us." "So that's your justification for blocking my gate?" "Our duty is to maintain standards," she said. "You'll be receiving formal notices. I suggest you take them seriously." The clipboard snapped shut. She turned, motioned to her convoy, and the 3 vehicles reversed with synchronized precision before pulling away down the road. Dust rolled behind them, thick and rising in the morning sun, leaving me alone with the echo of my father's gate rattling in the breeze. I stood there for a long moment, fingers resting on the iron latch, listening to the faint hum of the dam downstream. That sound had been the heartbeat of this land since long before Marshland Heights planted their first mailboxes. Dad once told me, "Water shapes the valley, son. Anyone who thinks they can control it doesn't understand how nature works." I never imagined those words would matter. Not until today. 10 minutes into inheriting the ranch, I'd already been accused, judged, and warned. By strangers. By people who acted like they held more claim to my family's legacy than I did. I finally swung open the gate and drove through, but unease clung to me like dust on my boots. HOAs didn't show up in convoys. They didn't block private entrances, and they sure didn't speak like they owned the place unless they thought they had leverage. As I approached the house, the lake glinted through the trees, calm, steady, reflecting the sky like nothing had changed. But something had. Something I couldn't yet see. Why had an HOA dared to claim authority over a lake and land they didn't even own? The question hung over me as I carried boxes into the ranch house, each creak of the floorboards reminding me my father wasn't here to explain any of this. The house felt heavier now, like it was holding its breath. 2 mornings later, a crisp white envelope was wedged under the front door. No stamp, no knock, no courtesy. Just a bold letterhead. Marshland Heights Community Association. Inside were 3 violation notices so neatly typed they looked machine-made. Violation 1. Visible heavy equipment impacting community aesthetics. Fine, $200 per day. Violation 2. Unapproved fencing inconsistent with subdivision standards. Fine, $200 per day. Violation 3. Shoreline disorder. Failure to maintain water edge consistency. Fine, $200 per day. I read the sentences twice. The absurdity didn't soften. It sharpened. They weren't just poking the bear. They were already calculating how much they could charge it. I stepped onto the porch and stared across the lake toward the row of identical Marshland Heights homes. A few rooftops peeked over the ridge, but no one was in sight. It felt like dealing with ghosts that sent invoices. A truck rumbled up the driveway. Waylon Briggs climbed out, wearing the same faded ball cap he'd owned since the 90s. He saw the letter in my hand and whistled low. "They didn't waste a minute, did they?" he said. "You expected this?" Waylon leaned against the porch rail, shoulders sagging like he'd carried this conversation for years. "Your daddy didn't like talking about it, but Linda and her board, they've been circling this place like hawks. They don't care about fence paint or tractors. They want that lake." He pointed his chin toward the water. "HOA's been using it for their brochures. Premium lakeside living. Folks move in thinking they bought a piece of it." "They didn't," I said. "Doesn't stop them from acting like they did." The irritation rolled through my chest like a slow burn. My father had known about all this and hadn't said a word before he passed. Why? To protect me? To avoid burdening me? Or because he thought he could hold them off forever? Waylon tapped the envelope. "They'll push harder now that your daddy's gone. They think you'll fold." "Do I look like I'm folding?" He cracked a smile. "Not yet, but they're counting on overwhelming you. Notices, letters, inspectors. They drown you in paper until you'd rather pay than fight." I walked back inside, something pushing me toward Dad's old office. The air smelled faintly of cedar and engine grease. Everything sat where he'd left it. Wrenches laid out by size, notepads stacked with the corners squared. The desk drawers groaned as I pulled them open, one after another, searching for something, anything. Most drawers held invoices, ranch supply receipts, and scraps of handwritten notes. But the bottom drawer stuck. I braced a knee and pulled until it jerked open with a dusty cough. Inside was a folder marked in my father's handwriting. Maddocks, water, and land boundaries. My heartbeat kicked. I flipped it open. Inside, there were survey maps dating back to the 70s. Deeds, water filings, notes scribbled in the margins. But one sheet stopped me cold. A topographical map of the lake and dam, the kind surveyors use. A red box circled the entire lake, dam, inlet channel, and shoreline. Next to it, my father had written 2 words: "Watch this." I sat back in the old chair, letting the weight of the page settle. Dad had been warning himself, or maybe warning me. The circle wasn't random. It encompassed everything the HOA was now targeting. Why mark it unless he knew they'd come for it? Footsteps scraped outside. I looked up as Waylon reappeared in the doorway. "Find something?" he asked. "I don't know yet," I said. But Dad was tracking something around the lake, something he thought mattered. Waylon frowned. He didn't trust that HOA. Said they were poking around the edges of his deed more often than coyotes around a chicken coop. I held up the violation letters. "They're claiming shoreline disorder. They actually think they can regulate what happens on my lake." Waylon snorted. "They tried that on me once. Claimed my cattle trail was unsightly. I told them the trail was older than every house in Marshland Heights combined." He stepped inside, voice dropping. "Cole, whatever your daddy circled, you'd better figure it out fast. Those folks don't poke, they pry. And if they want the lake bad enough, they'll invent 100 reasons why you're in the wrong." I looked again at the 3 violations, feeling the irritation shift to something hotter. They weren't just bluffing. They were moving fast, too fast for this to be random. They'd planned this. The thought landed like a stone. If they wanted a fight, they were about to get one. But before swinging back, I needed to understand exactly what Dad had been watching and why he hadn't told me the full story before the end. I closed the folder, gripping the top tightly. "What were you trying to protect, Dad?" I whispered. Outside, a car slowed near the driveway, someone inside snapping photos of the property before driving off. Waylon noticed. "Told you," he said. "They're watching already." I stood, feeling the floor under my boots. They want the lake, but they don't know yet that my father marked every inch of this place with purpose. I slid the map back into the folder, and I intend to find out why. The violation letters lay scattered on the desk like small, arrogant threats. 3 pieces of paper that had no idea what kind of storm they'd just woken. I gathered them, slid them into a folder labeled HOA, and set it beside my father's old map. If Dad left breadcrumbs, I needed to follow everyone. By the next morning, the harassment wasn't creeping. It was sprinting. A faint buzzing reached my ears through the open kitchen window. At first, I thought a bee had wandered in, but the sound grew steadier, more mechanical. I stepped outside onto the porch just in time to catch a drone hovering 20 feet above the yard. Its small camera lens blinked red, angled straight at me. I walked toward it. The drone rose higher, keeping its distance like it knew it had no right to be there, but wasn't afraid of being caught. "Unbelievable," I muttered. I snapped photos with my phone before it zipped backward toward the ridge bordering Marshland Heights. The timing couldn't be coincidence. The HOA wanted surveillance, and they wanted it now. I didn't even make it off the porch before a silver sedan rolled to a stop on the gravel shoulder by the property line. A woman leaned out of the window, lifted her phone, and took a picture of my tractor. Then my barn. Then me. She didn't say a word. Just drove off like collecting evidence was a casual errand. I headed for the gate, tension building under my skin. This wasn't an HOA being nosy. This was coordinated pressure. Before I reached the fence line, Sheriff Cal Whitmore's cruiser pulled up the drive. His tongue. He stepped out, hat tilted forward, expression neutral but tired. Not the tired of a long day, but the tired of being dragged into something he didn't want to touch. "Morning, Cole," he said. "Let me guess," I replied. You're not here for coffee. He exhaled. Got 3 anonymous complaints this morning. Claims of excessive noise, improper waste disposal, and unsafe shoreline conditions. Sheriff, I've been on this ranch alone for 2 days. The loudest thing I've done is turn on the kettle. I know, he said. But when we get complaints, we have to log them. HOA folks called them in as community concerns. I laughed once, sharp, humorless. They haven't even had time to unpack their real agenda. Cal rubbed his chin. Look, Cole. Linda's determined. That HOA's been a thorn in folks' sides for years. But this? He gestured at the lake. This is different. They're acting like they already own it. They don't, I said, and I have proof. Cal raised a brow. Your father's papers? More than that, boundaries, surveys, water filings. They're bluffing on territory they never controlled. He nodded slowly. Then document everything they do. Every drone, every car, every letter. If this escalates, and it will, you'll want a clean record. After he drove away, I felt the weight of the day settle on my shoulders. I didn't have the luxury of reacting emotionally. Dad's map wasn't just a warning, it was a playbook. I walked down to the lake, scanning the shoreline. Nothing seemed out of place, yet that only made it worse. Marshland Heights sat just beyond the trees on the opposite bank. I could picture their residents on back patios, sipping coffee and thinking the lake was part of their curated neighborhood. The illusion had become entitlement. That evening, more cars crept along the public road bordering the ranch. They slowed to a crawl, windows lowering just enough for phones to slip out. I didn't engage. I simply photographed every one of them, time-stamped and stored. But the real hit came the next morning. A thick packet was taped to the gate. A request for shoreline inspection, signed by Linda Caraway herself. She claimed unsafe erosion, vegetation mismanagement, and unfiltered debris jeopardizing community water integrity. I tore the packet open. Inside, they'd included printed photos, close-up shots of the lake's edge taken from the HOA side, some from angles that could only have come from a boat or shoreline trespass. They were building a case, a fake case, one violation at a time. My jaw tightened. I headed back to the house and opened Dad's folder again. If the HOA wanted to weaponize paperwork, then paperwork was how I'd answer them. But first, I needed to know exactly how far they'd already crossed the line. I stood, grabbed the truck keys, and drove straight toward Marshland Heights, not to confront Linda, not yet, but to see with my own eyes how deep their lie ran. The closer I got, the more signs I saw. Private lake access for residents. Photos on their entrance board showing paddleboards and picnics. A promotional banner reading, "Experience Lakeside Living." My father's lake. My family's dam. My land on their advertising. Rage pulsed behind my ribs, but I swallowed it. Emotion clouded strategy, and strategy was what I needed. I snapped photos of every sign, every poster, every marketing board. Evidence. Evidence they didn't know I was collecting. Back at the ranch, as the sun dipped behind the ridge, I pieced together the truth. This wasn't about violations or fences or aesthetics. They'd built an entire community identity on land and water they didn't own. And now that I had inherited the ranch, they were scrambling to maintain the illusion, by force if necessary. I opened my father's map again, eyes tracing the red box around the lake. He knew. He saw what they were doing, and he wanted me to see it too. Helplessness faded. Determination took its place. I gathered every letter, every photo, every recording, and created the first file in what would become a much larger collection. HOA trespass. Evidence log. Day 1. The storm they'd woken was growing, and soon enough, they would realize the lake they'd misclaimed, the same lake they flaunted to buyers and residents, was the very thing that could pull their entire foundation out from under them. But knowing the truth wasn't enough. I needed proof that wouldn't bend under pressure, paperwork that couldn't be twisted by HOA jargon. Why was Linda pushing so aggressively, and what exactly was she hiding? I intended to find out. The next morning, I drove straight to the county recorder's office. No calls, no warnings. If the HOA wanted to bury me under documents, I'd use their weapon against them. Inside, rows of metal filing cabinets lined the walls like soldiers standing at attention. A clerk in her 50s with sharp eyes and a sharper memory recognized my last name before I even opened my mouth. "You must be Cole," she said. "Your father came here often, always checking on the same things." "What things?" I asked. She gestured toward a workstation. "Property boundaries, water filings, easements. Folks don't always understand his land isn't just land. It runs the water table around here." My heart kicked. Water filings. Dad had said the lake was the ranch's heart. Maybe he meant it literally. She typed on her computer, then printed a stack of documents. "Everything related to the Maddox Ranch," she said. "Better have a seat." I did, and within 5 minutes, I found the first crack in the HOA's story. A map dated 23 years ago showed the lake, dam, feeder stream, and surrounding trails. Bold lines marked the property boundaries. Every inch fell inside the Maddox parcel. There was no ambiguity, no shared shoreline, no access point belonging to Marshland Heights. But that wasn't the good part. Next came records of public events hosted by the HOA. Weddings, summer festivals, paddleboard socials. Every record listed the lake as part of Marshland Heights' community space. Every record implied ownership they didn't have. And every record counted as evidence of trespass. A chill spread through me. They'd been using my land for years, selling the idea of lakeside living to residents who never had legal access in the first place. But the biggest revelation came from a manila folder stamped Water Rights Filings. Dad had renewed the filings every 5 years, like clockwork. Not one lapse, not one missing page. He wasn't just protecting boundaries, he was protecting control of the water itself. The clerk leaned over the counter. "Your father was very thorough. He knew people would come for the lake eventually. He called it inevitable pressure." I stared at the papers. He saw this coming. "Long before Marshland Heights was built," she said. "Developers approached him, wanting to rezone the lake. He refused, loudly." Something clicked in my mind. Sharp, final, undeniable. Linda wasn't enforcing HOA standards. She was covering a lie. If the residents learned their private lake wasn't theirs at all, the entire HOA would face lawsuits from inside and out. Property values would nosedive, insurance violations would stack, their lakeside community identity would collapse. That explained the speed, the aggression, the intensity. She wasn't trying to control me. She was trying to protect herself. I flipped to the last document and froze. A permit amendment request, denied 11 years ago. Submitted by Marshland Heights Development Board, years before the HOA was fully formed. The request? Proposed recreational easement over northern shoreline of Maddox Lake. The reason for denial? No legal authority over Maddox-owned land. Boundary infringement. Stamped, dated, signed. They'd tried once, and failed. Then quietly used the lake anyway. I photographed every page. Multiple angles, high resolution, printed copies, email backups. If the HOA wanted a war of paperwork, they'd chosen the wrong opponent. As I stepped outside into the parking lot, the sense of rising confidence surprised me. Not because the fight was over, but because for the first time, I understood the real stakes. This wasn't petty control or overreach. This was fraud. On the drive back, I slowed as I approached the ridge. A group of residents stood on the HOA side, staring across the lake like they sensed something shifting. A man raised his phone, filming as if building his own archive. They'd sensed the truth soon enough. Back at the ranch, I laid the new documents beside Dad's map. The red box he'd drawn matched the surveyed boundaries perfectly. He wasn't worried about erosion, vegetation, or fence lines. He was worried about theft. I sat at the desk, tension transforming into something sharper. Purpose. The HOA was pretending to own something that had never been theirs. And they weren't just lying to me. They were lying to every homeowner who paid premiums for exclusive lake privileges. If this went public, Marshland Heights wouldn't just get embarrassed. They would implode. A car door slammed outside. I stepped onto the porch and found Linda herself marching up the driveway, clipboard under her arm, 2 board members flanking her. "Mr. Maddox," she called, "we need to discuss your non-compliance with the shoreline inspection request." I didn't move. "I'm not participating in anything from your association." "You don't have a choice," she said sharply. "Your property affects our community." I held up a clear sleeve containing their denied easement request. Her eyes flicked to it instantly. "I found something at the county office," I said. "Interesting raid. Looks like you knew this land wasn't yours to regulate." The color drained from her face before she masked it with faux indignation. "You're misinterpreting administrative documents." "No," I said calmly. "I'm reading them exactly as written." For the first time, her voice faltered. "Where did you get that?" "Public records," I replied. "Where lies go to die." Her jaw tightened. "We will pursue this legally." "So will I said, stepping closer. "And I have more than you think." She hesitated, just long enough to confirm everything. Then she spun on her heel and marched back to her SUV. Her fear confirmed the truth. She wasn't enforcing rules. She was fighting to keep an entire neighborhood from turning on her. As she drove off, I looked at the pile of documents on my desk. The deception went deeper than violations or fines, and I intended to uncover every inch of it. If the HOA had no rights, why were they pretending they did? And how deep did the deception go? The question stayed with me through the night, through the hours I spent scanning documents into digital folders, through the moments I caught myself replaying the look on Linda Caraway's face when she saw the denied easement request. She wasn't surprised I found it. She was terrified I had it. By morning, the anger had cooled into something stronger. Strategy. It was time to bring in someone who understood land warfare fought on paper. I called the only name that came recommended by both ranchers and half the county office, Harper Sloan. She picked up on the second ring, her voice steady, clipped, efficient. "This is Harper." "Mrs. Sloan, my name is Cole Maddox. You inherited the Maddox Lake property," she cut in. "I've been expecting your call." That stopped me cold. "How did you—" "HOA disputes aren't quiet, Cole. And Marshland Heights has been circling your land like buzzards for years. Your father consulted me once. Briefly." I swallowed. He never said anything. He didn't want to worry you, but he knew eventually someone would need to finish the fight. 30 minutes later, she was sitting at my kitchen table, slim briefcase open, reading through the documents I'd collected. No wasted motion, no polite small talk, just eyes scanning, flipping, marking, comparing. After 20 minutes, she sat back. "Your father left you a fully loaded arsenal," she said. "How bad is it?" "For them? Catastrophic." She tapped the water rights filings. "This gives you exclusive control of the lake and dam. Not shared. Not partial. Exclusive. Water law is older than HOA law, far older, and it supersedes any claim they try to fabricate." She lifted the denied easement request. "And this? This is the nail in their coffin. They attempted a land grab, were denied, and then proceeded anyway under false pretenses. That's not just overreach, that's exposure." "Exposure to what?" I asked. Liability, she said. Massive liability. She explained, every time the HOA held a public event on my lake, they were responsible for injuries, accidents, property damage. Every time they advertised lake access, they misrepresented a community asset they didn't possess. Every resident who paid a premium for waterfront privileges had grounds for legal action, against the HOA, not me. Linda knows all of this, Harper said, which is why she's escalating. She's trying to force compliance to create the illusion of authority before someone pulls back the curtain. And that someone is me, she nodded. But before we make a move, you need to stay silent. Let them overplay their hand. The more they push, the uglier this becomes for them in front of a judge. Another car passed slowly along my fence line. Another phone lifted toward the ranch. They're pushing already, I said. Good, Harper replied. Document everything. Don't respond to anything they send you. And above all, don't agree to any inspections. If they step foot on your land without permission, it only strengthens your case. She began organizing the papers into stacks: trespass evidence, misrepresentation evidence, water rights filings, boundary maps. Watching her work felt like watching a surgeon assemble instruments before a procedure. Cole, she said finally, you need to understand something. This isn't a property dispute. This is a community built on a lie, and that lie sits directly on your land. When it unravels, people will panic. Is that why residents keep driving by? Yes, they're sensing instability. HOAs survive on the illusion of absolute control. When that cracks, people turn on leadership. And Linda will do anything to keep that from happening. Exactly. She closed her briefcase with a soft click. This is the calm before the storm. They think you're isolated. They think you don't know the law. They think intimidation will make you fold. She stood. Let them think it, for now. I walked her to the door, but she paused before stepping outside. One more thing, she said. Your father didn't circle that lake on the map because he feared losing it. He circled it because he knew it would one day save you. The words hit deep, somewhere past grief and into something steadying. Dad hadn't left a warning. He'd left a weapon. As Harper drove away, I went down to the shoreline. The water was still, carrying reflections of trees and sky, unaware of the fight building around it. But in that quiet surface was everything: control, leverage, truth. I crouched, touched the water, and understood what Harper meant. HOAs could write violations and demand fines. They could threaten, harass, intimidate. But water didn't bend to paper threats. It followed law, real law, and the law was on my side. The calm would not last. Marshland Heights would escalate. Linda would escalate. And soon, every hidden thread of their deception would come to light. I rose, ready for whatever came next. The HOA didn't take long to show their answer. By the end of the week, Marshland Heights was buzzing like a kicked anthill. Their group chats, community boards, and Facebook pages lit up with talk about the lake situation. Cars slowed more often near my fence line. Some residents rolled down windows and shot me curious looks. Others hid behind tinted glass, filming. They didn't know what I had. They only knew something had shifted, and they didn't like not knowing which way gravity was tilting. Then came the event. I saw the setup from the ridge above the lake. White canopies, folding tables, a giant vinyl banner fluttering in the breeze. Marshland Heights Annual Summer Splash, private lake access for residents only. Private lake access. They were doubling down, reckless and loud. And they had no idea they were trespassing on every inch of the land beneath their feet. Harper had warned me, stay calm. Let them build the evidence for us. So I stayed back and watched. Residents streamed down my shoreline as if they owned it. Coolers on wheels, children dragging inflatable float rings, Men in branded HOA polo shirts barking orders about where to set up the volleyball nets. Music spilled from portable speakers. A woman started decorating a table with balloons. A group of teenagers jumped off the dock. The dock my father rebuilt himself 15 years ago. Every sound carved deeper into the moment. Use, occupation, control. All captured in the photos and videos I took from the tree line. Then I saw Linda Caraway. She was directing volunteers like a general marching an army, clipboards, sunglasses, and the smug confidence of someone who believed the law bent around her. She lifted her megaphone and shouted to the crowd, "Let's make this the best lake day yet. Remember, this is one of the finest amenities of Marshland Heights." Amenity. They weren't even hiding the fiction anymore. I walked down the slope, slow and deliberate, until I reached the fringes of the gathering. A few heads turned, but Linda didn't notice until I was close enough to step into her shadow. "Well," she said, eyes narrowing, "look who decided to join us. Mr. Maddox, enjoying the community you're part of?" "I'm not part of your community," I said, "and neither is this land." She smirked, tapping her clipboard. "Cole, we've already been through this. The lake is an integral community resource. It's always been shared." "Shared implies permission," I said. "You don't have any." Her jaw stiffened. "This attitude," she snapped, "is exactly why you're receiving fines. You're antagonistic, non-compliant, disruptive." I almost laughed. If only she knew how disruptive I was about to become. A resident nearby frowned. "Fines? What's he being fined for?" Linda shot the woman a silencing glare. "Nothing that concerns you." But the spell was broken. People were listening. Good. "Enjoy your event," I said, backing away. "Make sure to document it well." She blinked. "Why would we?" But I didn't answer. I returned to the ridge, lifted my camera, and made sure every angle, every face, every sign, every use of my property was preserved in high resolution. Hours passed. Kids splashed, adults drank, volunteers cleaned up. The sun dipped low, and beneath it all, the truth sat quietly like a fuse waiting to be lit. By dusk, the lake was still again. Canopies down. Coolers wheeled uphill. Residents gone. But footprints littered the sand. Tire tracks rutted the shoreline, and trash bags leaned against my fence like they were waiting for my approval. This was no longer an HOA claiming oversight. This was an HOA claiming ownership. I walked through the remnants of their event, collecting discarded wristbands and brochures. One brochure nearly made me laugh. "Welcome to Lakeside Luxury Living. Exclusive amenities right outside your back door." Exclusive amenities. On land they didn't own. On land they had never owned. As night closed in, I stood at the end of the dock, looking out toward the dark ripples. The lake didn't know boundaries or arrogance or trespass. It just reflected what stood before it. The silence should have calmed me, but it didn't. It hardened me. Harper's plan settled into place. We would not warn them. We would not negotiate early. We would not soften the blow. We would let them pile evidence into our hands until the weight snapped their entire foundation apart. The next morning, I emailed Harper the pictures, videos, and brochure scans. She responded within minutes. "Perfect. Let them keep digging. The deeper the hole, the easier the burial." I set my phone down, stepped onto the porch, and breathed in the cold air. The calm had ended. The storm was next. Harper didn't ease into it. She didn't tiptoe, didn't warn, didn't negotiate. On Monday morning at precisely 9:04 a.m., she filed the cease and desist and hand-delivered a packet so thick it could have doubled as a doorstop. The HOA office sat on the edge of Marshland Heights, an over-polished building with an artificial pond out front, the kind that pretended nature could be bought in bulk. Harper walked in with the confidence of someone who already knew exactly how this would end. I stayed in my truck across the lot, watching residents come and go. 5 minutes later, the front windows lit up with movement. Through the glass, I saw it. Linda Carraway's posture stiffening, her smile collapsing, her hand freezing mid-gesture as she scanned the first page. She barked something toward the receptionist, then snatched the packet and flipped through it. Faster, then slower, then with a snap of panic. Harper didn't sit. She didn't offer a handshake. She turned and walked out as calmly as she walked in. She opened my truck door and climbed in. "It's done," she said. "She's about to scream." She wasn't wrong. Inside, Linda bolted from her office, waving the papers like she planned to swat someone with them. I couldn't hear her from the truck, but her mouth was a thin, trembling line. 2 board members appeared, confused, then worried, then pale. The fuse had been lit. Harper checked her phone. "They'll call you within the hour." They called in 9 minutes. I let it ring twice before answering. "Mr. Maddox?" Linda snapped, not bothering with a greeting. "What is this supposed to be? A prank? A threat?" "It's a legal notice," I said. "You received it." "You have no right." "That lake is mine," I said. "The records prove it." "You can't just terminate public access. That lake has been a community amenity for years." "Without permission," I countered, "which means trespass, which means liability, which means you have a very expensive problem." Silence. Thick, electric. Then she tried a different tactic, lowering her voice into something that aimed for intimidation and landed somewhere closer to desperation. "You're new here, Cole. You don't understand how governance works. You can't just take away something people depend on." "I'm not taking anything," I said. "I'm reclaiming what was never yours." She inhaled sharply. "This will not end well for you." "It already ended," I said. "Read page 7. I hung up. Harper smirked. "Page 7 is where we list the lake access fees." Because that was the real bomb. The HOA had been charging residents for lake access, charging real money for a lake they legally never controlled. Yearly stickers, event fees, amenity premiums rolled into closing costs. All documented, all public, all built on a lie. By noon, the story spread through Marshland Heights like wildfire on a dry wind. Residents stormed the office demanding answers. 2 board members slipped out the back. Someone posted the cease and desist online, and the comments exploded with confusion and anger. Harper and I drove to the ridge overlooking the lake. From there, we could see the ripple effect, tiny shapes gathering at the clubhouse, people pointing, gesturing toward my shoreline as if it had betrayed them personally. "They're panicking," Harper said. "Good. Panic exposes truth." "What happens now?" when I asked. "Now," she said, pulling a folder from her bag, "we wait for them to make their next mistake." It arrived the next morning. A community-wide email, poorly written and even more poorly thought through, landed in every Marshland Heights inbox. Subject: false claims by new property owner. The HOA is investigating fabricated allegations regarding lake ownership. Residents should continue to treat the lake as HOA property. Fabricated. The word practically begged a judge to intervene. Harper laughed, an incredulous, delighted sound. "She really sent this. Cole, this is defamation in writing. She might as well have mailed us a bigger hammer." By afternoon, multiple residents reached out privately, some apologetic, some furious at the board, some begging for clarity. But the moment that sealed the shift came from the last person I expected. Sheriff Cal Whitmore drove up my gravel road, dust trailing behind him. He stepped out, hat tucked under his arm. "Cole," he said, "mind if I come in?" We sat at the kitchen table. He laid down a printout of the HOA email. "You planning to do something about this?" he asked. Yes, I said. Good, he replied. Because half that neighborhood is in my lobby right now demanding to know who owns the lake, and I'm not spending my week mediating a fight your deed already answers. He tapped the email. They're lying, son, and lying loud. You let your lawyer handle this, but you don't let them push you. That was all he needed to say. That evening, Harper drafted our official reply. Your HOA has been unlawfully accessing private land, charging residents for access rights it does not possess, and publicly defaming the landowner who holds legal title. All lake use is terminated effective immediately. Any further unauthorized presence will be documented as trespass. Prepare for court. No threats, no embellishments. Just truth sharpened to a point. We sent it at 7:42 p.m. At 7:49, Linda called again. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was short, furious, cracking at the edges. Cole, you don't understand what you've done. Call me back immediately. But I didn't. Because the storm she feared wasn't coming. It was already here. And by the time the HOA realized they couldn't outrun what was coming, the courthouse lobby was full. Residents murmuring, board members pacing, and Linda Caraway rehearsing whatever version of the truth she planned to sell. Harper and I walked in through the side door. We didn't make eye contact with anyone. We didn't need to. Every step was powered by the mountain of evidence in Harper's briefcase. Photos, deeds, water rights filings, event flyers, HOA newsletters, amenity fee spreadsheets, lake access payment records. The very paperwork they'd weaponized against others was about to be turned on them. Judge Evelyn Hartman entered without ceremony. She didn't smile. She didn't greet the room. She simply lifted her glasses, glanced between the two tables, and said, "Let's begin." The HOA's attorney rose first, a polished man with a rehearsed voice designed to sound authoritative no matter how thin his argument. Your Honor, this is a simple misunderstanding blown out of proportion. The HOA has maintained peaceful use of the lake for decades with the understanding that— Judge Hartman lifted a hand. Understanding, she repeated. Do you have a written contract confirming access or ownership? A pause. Well, not in writing. Then move on. The room stirred, residents exchanging startled looks. The attorney cleared his throat. Historical use establishes— No, Hartman cut in. Historical trespass does not create property rights. Next argument. It was the first cracks in the HOA's armor, and they were widening fast. Harper rose. Your Honor, I'd like to begin with deeded ownership. She stepped forward and handed the judge a certified packet. Cole Maddox holds full title to the ranch, the lake, and the dam, confirmed in county records dating back nearly 70 years. The HOA has zero legal authority over this land. Hartman skimmed the first page, nodded once, and turned to the HOA attorney. Do you contest the deed? No, Your Honor, but the community relies heavily on the lake. Reliance is not ownership. The attorney sank. Harper continued. Next, trespass. She displayed a tablet screen, casting photos onto the courtroom monitor. From the ridge, from the shoreline, from the dock. Clear images of HOA canopies, residents swimming, banners reading private HOA amenity. Gasps rippled through the crowd. These events, Harper said, were held without permission on my client's land. The HOA charged residents for access they didn't legally possess. She flipped to the next slide. HOA financial reports. Line items labeled lake maintenance fees, amenity premium, and lake pass revenue, all collected from homeowners under the false pretense that the HOA controlled lake rights. Judge Hartman stared at the screen for a long, cold moment. Then she turned to Linda. Ms. Caraway, is this accurate? Linda stood slowly. Every ounce of confidence she once carried evaporated. We simply continued what previous boards had established. It was always treated as community property. Because you treated it that way, Hartman said sharply, does not make it so. She looked at Harper. Continue. Harper slid forward another folder. Violation notices, evidence of harassment, trespass, fabricated claims. Your Honor, in addition to trespassing and misrepresenting ownership, the HOA issued unauthorized fines, conducted unauthorized inspections, and orchestrated a defamation campaign when Mr. Maddox resisted their unlawful demands. Linda snapped, loud enough for the room to hear. That's not true. He was hostile from the start. He refused cooperation. Cooperation, Harper repeated. With an entity that never had authority over him? Judge Hartman leaned forward. Ms. Carraway, sit down. Linda froze, then obeyed. The courtroom absorbed the silence like oxygen. Harper delivered the next blow. Finally, Your Honor, liability. She clicked the final slide. A summary of incidents during HOA-run lake events. Minor injuries, property damage, unauthorized lifeguard services, and insurance filings. All these occurred on land the HOA never had the right to use. Should any serious incident have happened, the liability would fall not on the HOA's policy, but on Mr. Maddox personally. A new wave of gasps. Residents turned on one another, whispering frantic questions. Judge Hartman set down her pen. This is not a complicated case, she said. The law is painfully clear. She faced the HOA's attorney. Your client trespassed. Your client misrepresented property rights. Your client charged residents for amenities built on lies. And when confronted, your client doubled down with intimidation and defamation. The attorney wilted. Linda's face went gray. Then came the ruling, the hammer swing that would echo across the valley. I am granting a preliminary injunction, effective immediately. The HOA shall cease all claims or enforcement actions on Mr. Maddox's property. The HOA shall immediately discontinue all lake events, gatherings, and access. No HOA member may enter Mr. Maddox's land until this case is resolved. A financial audit of HOA amenity fees related to the lake will commence within the week. Negotiation of a legal lease, if sought, will occur under court supervision. The gallery erupted. Half outrage, half relief, all shock. Linda rose again, trembling. Your Honor, shutting down the lake will devastate our community. You can't. Hartman's gavel hit once, sharp as a rifle crack. I can, and I have. She looked at me next. Mr. Maddox, you acted appropriately by seeking remedy through the court. Continue documenting everything. We proceed to settlement next. I nodded. But behind me, homeowners began shouting at the board members. Accusations, demands, disbelief. The HOA president, the woman who once ruled the community like a monarch, was now shrinking beneath the weight of her own lies. Harper leaned toward me and whispered, This is the beginning of their collapse. The rest? That'll come faster than you expect. Harper had been right about everything so far, but even she couldn't have predicted just how violently Marshland Heights would implode once Judge Hartman's injunction took effect. The ruling hit the community like a hammer. The very next morning, HOA residents lined the sidewalk outside the clubhouse. Some shouting, some quiet and pale, others shaking printed copies of Hartman's order as if trying to wake themselves from a nightmare. Lake access suspended amenity fees under investigation, HOA board meeting, emergency session. Signs had been taped everywhere, as if the HOA believed paper could contain panic. I parked my truck at the edge of my property and watched the meltdown unfold from across the fence line. I wasn't gloating. I wasn't vengeful. I was simply observing what happens when the truth finally arrives after being held back too long. Word spread fast. The lake never belonged to them. They'd been paying for a lie. The HOA had spent their fees illegally. Their property values might even be affected. That last one stung them more than anything. One resident, a man in a golf visor, stormed up to Linda where she stood on the clubhouse steps. "You charged us for lake maintenance, for lake upgrades, for boat storage fees," he shouted. "How do you charge for something you don't own?" Linda tried to raise her hands for calm, but her voice cracked. "We acted in the community's interest. We relied on long-standing precedent." "You relied on fraud!" another resident yelled. The crowd surged, voices layered over each other. Angry, betrayed, frightened. It wasn't just money. It wasn't just access. It was the reality that the people they'd trusted to manage their neighborhood had treated lies as policy. And the lies had finally come due. I turned when I heard a car approach. Sheriff Cal Whitmore. He stepped out, adjusting his belt, eyes scanning the chaos. "You caused quite a storm," he muttered to me. "I didn't cause anything," I said. "I just stopped pretending." He gave a low grunt, half approval, half amusement. "Well, the board called us, said they're expecting tempers to flare. Looks like they're already past that stage." A roar broke out at the clubhouse. A new fight, this one louder. Residents had cornered two board members. I could hear snippets. "You lied to us. You said we owned the lake. You raised dues because of maintenance you never paid for. You're finished, Linda." That last one hit hard, and judging from the way Linda stiffened, she knew it too. By mid-afternoon, the meeting inside the clubhouse imploded. Residents filed out in waves, some furious, some quiet, some crying. One woman looked at her husband and whispered, "We trusted them. We trusted her." Finally, the HOA board stepped outside, Linda leading them like a defeated general. A resident pointed at her. "Resign," another joined. "You're done." More voices followed, merging into a chant. "Resign, resign, resign." Linda's face cracked. She tried to shout over them, tried to summon the authority she once wielded so easily, but her voice disappeared beneath the chorus of her own undoing. The board voted right there on the steps. Effective immediately, Linda Caraway was removed as HOA president. Sheriff Whitmore crossed his arms. "Fastest coup I've ever seen." But the collapse wasn't done. At sunset, I received an email from Harper with the subject line, "HOA proposal, urgent." I opened it. The new interim board, desperate to salvage what remained, wanted to negotiate a lease. 30 years, fair market value, legal access only under strict conditions, and full coverage of my legal fees. A lease. They'd gone from trespassing and threatening fines to offering to pay me for the privilege of stepping onto land they once claimed as theirs by default. But the real twist was tucked into the last line of Harper's note. "They know they won't survive without the lake. You hold all the leverage now." She wasn't exaggerating. Marshland Heights had built its identity, property values, and community appeal around exclusive lake access. Without the lake, they weren't a luxury development. They were just another neighborhood with high dues and a disgraced board. And they knew it. Residents gathered along the fence that evening, some nervous, some hopeful. A man called out, "Cole, we're sorry for how things were handled. We just want a fair solution." A woman added, "You deserved respect. Linda never gave it." They weren't the enemy. They were collateral damage in a lie they never agreed to. But justice wasn't about punishing them. It was about correcting what had been stolen. Legally, cleanly, permanently. The HOA's power had shattered. Their foundation was dust. Their leadership had fallen. All that remained was the decision only I could make. Would I grant them a lease, or reclaim the lake entirely and let the community rewrite itself without the illusion of ownership? The next step would determine the future of both my ranch and theirs. For the first time since I'd inherited the land, the weight on my shoulders felt balanced. Not lighter, just evenly distributed. The truth had come out. The lies had collapsed. And now the question wasn't about fighting an enemy. It was about choosing the shape of justice. The morning after the injunction, Harper and I met in her office to discuss the lease proposal. She slid the paper across her desk toward me. 30 years, she said. Fair market rate. Full reimbursement of all legal fees. They're desperate, Cole. They know they can't survive without the lake. I scanned the terms. The board had already signed the preliminary offer. Every member except Linda, who no longer had the authority to weigh in. You could refuse, Harper said carefully. You're well within your rights. You could block them out forever. And leave the community fractured? I asked. That's not your responsibility, she answered. But it's your decision. And it was. A decision that would echo across the valley for a generation. I thought of my father, how he'd walked these same shorelines, tended the dam, preserved the lake not just as property, but as heritage. He'd protected it from drought, from erosion, from misuse. He would have protected it from greed too, but he'd also believed in fairness, in neighbors sharing what they respected. The key word was respect, something the old HOA had never shown. But the new board? The residents pleading for transparency? They deserved a chance to rebuild from honesty, not from the ashes someone else left behind. I set the proposal down. Harper, I said, draft acceptance terms. She arched a brow. Are you sure? I'm not giving them ownership, I said. Just access, under my rules, my boundaries, my oversight, and they'll pay fair value, not a penny less. A slow smile formed on her face. That's not just fair, she said. That's strategic. We finalized the terms that afternoon, and by evening the new board met me at the fence line. 3 residents who looked equal parts nervous and relieved. Mr. Maddox, the interim president said, extending a hand. Thank you for agreeing to even discuss this. Our community owes you an apology. You didn't owe me an apology, I said, but your old leadership did. A murmur passed through them. Shame, but also acceptance. Here's how this goes, I continued. You'll have access to the lake under a strict lease. No more events without approval. No more claiming amenities you don't own. No trespassing beyond the designated shoreline. One of the members nodded vigorously. We understand. Completely. And, I added, your HOA will cover all legal fees associated with your misuse of the lake. The group exchanged glances. Then all 3 nodded. It's fair, the president said. More than fair. For the first time, Marshland Heights looked at me not as an adversary, but as the man who'd kept the land intact when their own leadership failed them. We signed the agreement the next morning at the courthouse, under Judge Hartman's supervision. She stamped the final page, leaned back, and folded her hands. Mr. Maddox, she said, this resolution honors both the law and the land. Your father would have approved. It was the closest thing to a blessing I'd ever received from a court. Over the next week, word spread through the valley. The lake reopened, but under my terms. No more banners claiming HOA ownership. No more dues disguised as lake fees. Instead, the community posted a message at the entrance. Access provided through lease agreement, property of Maddox Ranch, respect the land, respect the legacy. Respect. Finally, and with the legal fights behind me, I turned back to the ranch, to the dam that needed maintenance, to the fences that needed work, to the life that had waited patiently for calm to return. One evening, after the last of the paperwork was filed and the new board had taken over fully, I walked down the dock with a cup of coffee. The water glimmered in the dying light, carrying the reflection of the mountains my family had watched for generations. The lake belonged to me. The land belonged to me. Justice belonged to the truth. And that truth had won, not with shouting or threats, but with evidence, patience, and the unshakable reality of what was written in ink long before any HOA ever existed. As I stood there, the wind brushed across the water, rippling the surface in quiet patterns, steady, patient, undeniable. Just like justice. If you've ever had to stand your ground for what's yours, drop a justice in the comments, so I know I'm not the only one out here fighting the good fight. Stories like this remind us that the land remembers who protects it, and so does the law. And if you want more real ranch justice and HOA reckonings, hit subscribe and ride with me on the next one.